we are live, and I'm in the middle of trying to share this show, and I am so behind. It is not even funny. I'm trying to share to this. Now I'm going to think and type. So while I'm trying to type this out, guys, anything? Okay, I have my happy mode. Okay, I got to step back because I'm all flustered. I'm all verklempt here, whatever.
Verklempt.
Verklempt. That's from a movie. Anyway,
that
so
is a movie. I remember.
Oh no, what was it? The coffee talk with on Saturday night. I'm overclamped. That's on a Saturday Night Live skit years ago, before your time, Jane.
Yeah.
Last week.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, last week. So here's what I wanted to say. What you get? We all need happy times. Before we get into our talk, we're gonna do CRT for Dummies today. Critical race theory for dummies, and it doesn't mean actually people are dummies. I just mean what we wanted to do this week was kind of boil it down, past the philosophy, past the deep stuff, and just say, okay, Christians, how do we engage this? What are some Bible verses we could use? What are some maybe some analogies? Leroy and I were talking about this week, so we'll talk about a few of those that came to mind, and so thinking that maybe we could dig into that. Before that. I mean, it's all heavy stuff. It's a heavy week. There's crazy things in the world. There's fires. My background is actually a picture of what it looks like here in California. Jane can attest to that. It's these red, crazy skies. And work on this. Now, actually, that's not true. This is actually Mars in the background. You can't totally see it, but there's the mountains.
Oh, no, it's
Mars.
The red planet. Now it makes sense. I remember from
right there. Yeah, that's actually the rover pictures they sent.
Deal?
Yeah, that's actually recent pictures that they just sent back. But it's weird because Jane knows, right?
Looks like
this
California.
is exactly what it looked like for you. This is what it's like. I'd walk out multiple days a week, and it's just so weird. I feel like I'm in a sci-fi movie. So anyway, what are your happy thoughts for this week, guys? Any news or events or life circumstances that are your happy thoughts?
Well, I mean, things are opening up again. So my friends and I went to a movie. I mean, it was the movies, but the movie was terrible. Tenant.
I want to see that movie.
You go see it and you tell me what you think about it. I was like,
Well, see, I love the director.
So do I. But then I was like, I don't know what he was trying to do in this one. I was a little confused. You go watch it and you tell me what you get out of it.
I'm going to go. See, I got to be honest with you. I've been reluctant to kind of go to the movie theater.
Oh, well, they're doing social distancing in the movie theater. Like every other row is empty and people have masks while they're watching movies.
Oh, really?
I don't want to sit in there with a mask on. I mean...
Well, I guess if you're eating food and drinking something, you could take it off.
Yeah. I want to see that movie, though. I mean, his first movie, Inception, was... I mean, not his first movie, but his movie, Inception, was just... amazing. I mean, it's one of the better movies.
That one was good. I don't know about this one. I don't know. Maybe COVID ruined everybody's directing and thought processes. I don't know.
Exactly.
I hear if you have COVID, you lose your sense of appreciation of art, and I hear that's like a symptom. So it's probably that's because you have it and you can appreciate the artistic value. That's probably what it is.
Some people were born with COVID then.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, that's probably true. We don't know. Because the testing is so new, but let's test for that. So, any happy things for you, Leroy? Even though Jane's happy thing turned out to be sad.
Yeah.
That was a downer,
Mixed emotions.
I can't say that there's been like a super happy thing, but I saw a friend of mine, his wife and I think their two grandchildren were in a car accident, a really bad one, and they survived. I'm sorry.
I said, "Oh boy, that's terrible."
Yeah, they were in a really bad car accident, but they survived. And I was thinking, and the next thought was, as bad as their injuries were bad, some broken things and bruised spleens and all these other sorts of things, but they lived. And I thought to myself, that's something to think and praise God for. You know what I mean? I mean, the accident happened. There's nothing we can do about that. But man, they survived as bad as the car accident was. So, I mean, that's kind of that makes me happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not happy about the accident. But I mean, they lived.
Happy that they're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, your happy thought is way different than my happy thought. I shared that video with you guys today because you won't see it when it goes live unless you're watching
I
on a
love
separate
that
screen.
video.
Okay, but I got to tell people, this is like my happy thought. Every now and again, there's a good internet video. Like sometimes it has little kittens or puppies or little kids getting knocked over by a puppy or something like that. That's always adorable and you got to watch like a million times. I've watched this one today like a million times. I showed it to everybody. It just brings a smile. Okay, now although the content is about politics, I could care less about the politics. People don't like freak out. This isn't one thing. This is just, if you don't appreciate the simple humor of this, and I'll tell you something, I noticed something in the way this was actually videoed. I think there's a level of brilliance in this too, that I'll see if you guys caught whenever we get to the end of this. I won't spoil it by saying it now, but I'll just say you got to think of the song, who sang this song, and then look at the context of where this is being filmed and how it's being filmed, and see if there isn't a little bit of a cinematic genius in the filmography here.
Walk away from the hate. We're all human, and we don't segregate.
Just like women, help make America great.
We are all in this together. Colors are red, white, and blue, and they stand for every one of you. And together, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make America great. Woo! Everybody sing M-A-G-A. M-A-G-A. Let them hear our voice. All you girls and boys, stand up and make some noise.
Now we're back. He's got the Michael Jackson thing going with the glove and the dancing. But okay, so did you guys pick up on what I think might be the cinematic genius of this? Thinking about who, the song and the context. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think I did, but I don't know that I want to say.
Okay, so for those too young to remember, Jane. So this was sung by a group with the YMCA was the original song.
Okay, I know that song.
MAGA, the MAGA song, but he rewrote that, and so this was sung by a group called the Village People. Do you know who the Village People were, Jane?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, I don't want to, So they were a group of, I think back then it was appropriate to call them homosexuals. I don't think they're gay or whatever they're appropriate, the now.
So
but they were all like,
movie.
flaming guys, which, that was their thing. That was their shtick. But they all dressed up like, one dressed up as an Indian, like Native American type Indian.
Police officer,
firefighter, construction worker. And they did all their stuff in these costumes, right? And so when I was watching this guy do this video, I was thinking, here's the YMCA song. He's using the policeman like a prop. They're real cops, but he's dancing in amongst the policemen, so it looks kind of like the policemen are doing it with him, even though they're not. They're there for crowd control. So I thought, I don't know if he did that on purpose or not, danced among them and did the video for that as the homage to the YMCA Village People thing. I just thought it was genius, and I think it's funny.
It was really smart.
It's great.
It was really laugh out loud kind of funny too, because it was really laugh out loud funny. I really liked it. As a matter of fact, I think that we should all start the new MAGA, dance off video show.
I know. Isn't that
totally
your
funny.
idea, Jane? You
Right
wanted
now?
us to switch to that format? Come on.
MAGA.
Yeah, we could do that.
Come on, that's actually funny.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking is that like our entire format, we could switch the entire off-the-cuff format to a dance-off thing. Interpretive dance. Jane, real quick, when you think of CRT, what dance comes to mind? Do it, and then you'd have to like dance.
You just spell CRT with your hands
If that's as creative as you can get, that's a start. I know we're new to this, but we're gonna work on this. That can be our new format. All right, that's enough kibitzing for now. So, all right. Well, I have all the weird words today: kibitzing, verklempt.
Verklempt.
Oh my
What's
God.
next?
I'm channeling all my Yiddish history or whatever, I guess. So anyway, all right, no more of that. So today, actually, we did, like I said, we wanted to get into the CRT for Dummies kind of episode here. And like I said, this isn't actually it's the Cliff Notes version. We're not really going to dig into all the details of what CRT, critical race theory, is. We see this stuff all around us. It's this idea, the Black Lives Matter group is grounded in this. The organization, social justice movement stuff is grounded in this. We've all talked about words like intersectionality, this idea of, we're kind of tiered groups of oppressor versus oppressed. All those language, when you hear words like whiteness, white privilege, all those are connected to critical race theory. And the real challenge is for Christians, it still goes on. I mean, I'm getting hundreds of, messages that I'm looking at every day of people like, hey, what's this? How does this mesh with the gospel? Is it part of the gospel? Is it antithetical to the gospel? Does it destroy the gospel? Does it enhance the gospel? And, and there's people all over the map. So I thought we could do just like a basic sort of Q&A and attach some of the simple, maybe Bible verses that we've thought of that might address an answer to some questions that come up. And then I know, Leroy, we chatted this week trying to come up with some analogies that would work to explain this. And so we went back and forth on some business, because we were trying to say, how do we explain this to somebody who's like a businessman or a businesswoman who doesn't know philosophy, maybe not strong in their theology, but they're Christian and they're trying to understand, what does this look like, right? So those are some of the things that we want to look at. So maybe I'll start with this question. And I'll fill in the verse that I was thinking of, and we can dig into it a little bit more, but you guys can see if there's a different verse that you have in mind as we set this up. So the one question that comes to mind is, should Christians support the good work of racial justice? So that seems to be the premise of how the question is often comes out is, hey, so, social justice, that's a good thing. And so why wouldn't Christians want to support things that are justice for everybody? This is a good thing. So that seems to be the question. The verse that I think maybe has some applicability here, and we can, like I said, expand on this a little bit as we talk, is Mark 10:18. And that's really Jesus' exchange. If folks want to look it up, it's Jesus having an exchange where these people call him, good. You're a good teacher, you're a good dude, what's up? And Jesus said, why do you call me good? Right? There's none good but God. And Jesus kind of has a point in this, that not that he's not good, not that he's not God, but he's trying to point out the irony of what this guy is saying is, you're calling me good, and you mean because you like the good stuff I do, you like the miracles I perform, you like the food I multiply, but those things aren't good in and of themselves. The only thing good is God. And so if you like the miracles, you like the God who provided them, and I'm God. And so he's sort of turning that word around and using it in a different meaning to point something out. And I think that passage, for me, has a little bit of application in this, because when people say, well, the good work of social justice, kind of my question now is, well, what do you call good? And is it possible to have good that's outside of God, or outside of God's nature, character, outside of basically his, the fullness of who God is established through his church, So that's one of those verses I was thinking about. So I don't know if that makes sense, or you guys have questions about that, or thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah. And I think when we talked about it, we talked about the very question of the embedded assumptions within the way people talk about racial justice. There's some embedded assumptions there that if you don't kind of tease out, then what ends up happening is a contemporary view of justice is inserted for a biblical view of justice. So what do I mean? What do I mean by that? We have a lot of people talking about justice today. I mean, justice this and justice that. But if we were to kind of drill down on and ask, what do they mean by justice? I'm certain that their definition of justice would be different than a biblical definition of justice.
Yeah. And just thinking about like objective morality, and we live in a relativistic world. So, and if we believe that, God is a moral God and he's given us morals, how are we supposed to work with people who don't believe the same morals? And they're probably not going to be the same as a Christian worldview. So it'd be kind of hard to work with a group of people who don't adhere to the same worldview. So whose morals are we going to institute? Or like, what does justice even mean? And those kind, like the definitions may mean different depending on what worldview you adhere to.
Yeah. Well, we kind of have a question too. So Wayne's on here. Looks like he's on Facebook. He says, doesn't placing an adjective in front of justice, the word social in this case, suddenly move one from justice to an agenda? What do you guys think about that question?
Well, it depends. It depends. So the Bible talks about retributive justice, but the Bible doesn't mean the kind of justice that the Bible wants us to employ is not retributive. We see examples of distributive justice even in the text, but the understanding of justice within the text is not primarily distributive. So we see all these kinds of definitions of justice that are more our contemporary understanding, but the Bible may be showing examples of these, of what not to do, or debunking them. So, for example, the whole book of Job is debunking the notion of retributive justice, right? I mean, that's kind of like one of the main themes of Job debunking. So we just have to be very clear on what is meant and the type of discussion. So what the questioner is saying, that just because someone puts social justice in front of the word justice, are they moving it to an agenda? Well, they may be. I mean, they may be, but that's not really. I don't know that ought to be our concern. Our concern may want to hold to a biblical understanding of what justice is, so that we might be able to see if there's some value. And not that there may be any, but there may be some value or something within the discussion that we can kind of glean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Jane, do you think, so does putting that word in social in front of justice, does that really move the goalpost somewhere completely different for you, in answer to Wayne's question?
Well, social justice means different things to different people nowadays. So can you give me like a clear definition of social justice?
Yeah.
Because when you talk to people, it's not the same. So
yeah, well, and I think that's part of the problem. I think in part, I would say that I think what Wayne's question, there's an element of truth to that in this sense. When we say justice, biblically speaking, and what that entails and what that involves, there's a lot of specific things, which include not just helping those who are poor or doing those things. There's an element of doing what is holy and righteous, and you can't separate those. So justice, biblically, even in society, justice lived out within the society at large, especially in the Old Testament, was because they were under the Old Testament law with Moses. Everybody adhered not just to the help your neighbor out financially, but there was a lot of set of moral laws. They had systems of sacrifice. They had those are all woven together, and you don't detach one from the other within that concept of in the Old Testament under the law. In the New Testament, we see a different era of justice. Not that the definition changed, but justice is brought forth through the cross of Christ. And so he brings both judgment to the world in the sense that he's not judging now like the end time judgment, but his judgment is, look at me, I'm dying on your behalf, and the judgment is, I'm receiving this judgment for you, so to speak, right?
Right.
And so in our time, in the New Testament under Christ, justice involves not just helping those like we see the New Testament church doing, but it also entails, the gospel itself. And so I think, in that context, if you look at this idea of social justice, regardless of how people define it, almost no definitions have anything to do with holiness or righteousness,
right?
Which are you can't extract biblically as a Christian from. Doesn't mean there wouldn't be points of agreement maybe with secular non-believers, but it's not. But social justice by definition is a biblical justice.
we should be wary of their definitions of social justice. Of course, there's not a Christian that I know that doesn't believe they ought to do good to people, that they ought to not help the poor, that feed the poor. But every Christian that I know, if he's really wrestling with these questions biblically, is going to say, the good that I do for someone societally and socially is not the best good that I could do for them, right? The best good I could do for them is preach the gospel to them.
Mm-hmm.
You catch what I'm saying? That's the best good that we could do. But what I think is happening, and I think what our friend is kind of alluding to, is that people want to raise the one at the expense of the other. I remember several years ago, someone came to my wife and wanted to partner with her in her ministry. And this woman's ministry was really good. I mean, she gave food to the poor. She bought clothes, got haircuts and everything. But she refused to preach the gospel to them at all. Refused to bring the gospel to them. Although in her mind, she was doing a better deed to them. And I think she had it backwards. And I think many of the folks who want us to be on the social justice train have it backwards. They put the cart before the horse.
Yeah. So, okay, well, so we'll unless you have anything else to say about that Mark 10:18 and what is good, or if anybody wants to jump in with a comment online or whatever, that's fine. But I think another question is this: isn't standing up for the oppressed part of the gospel? Again, we might want to camp out on what does that mean or whatever. But I kind of had, a verse that comes to my mind is John 14:4. And if you guys remember, this is when Jesus goes to the woman at the well. And, he says, hey, I need some water. And she says, here, let me get some. I've got a bucket. Let me get you some water. And Jesus is like, well, I have water that, you'll never thirst again. And everyone's like, what? Where's he getting this water at? What's going on? And so what we see in Jesus, he's saying, I think in this story, he's saying, yes, there's a physical things that certainly we need, like water and bread. He said, you have bread, but I'm the bread of life. And, he's always using earthly things to illustrate why he's the superior thing to that earthly thing that we comprehend bread, we comprehend water. He's like, but you can't comprehend me fully because, I'm God. I transcend so much of this. So let me give you, by analogy, I'm the bread of life. I'm the water that will quench your thirst eternally, without ever thirsting again. So when people say, standing up for oppressed is part of the gospel, I think part of what kind of bugs me about that, regardless of even how they want to define it, which we could get into, is that they're almost implying like, hey, isn't feeding the hungry part of the gospel? Yeah, but Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. Well, shouldn't we give somebody a cup of water if they? Well, yeah, but Jesus said, I'm this water that's eternal. And so, again, if we reduce the gospel to some kind of social action or changing laws, if we diminish the gospel to the point that it means nothing more except, some sort of social activism, then I think we miss the point of passages like we see in John chapter 4, where Jesus is trying to point out not that those things are unnecessary in life, but there's something even more important than those things which will keep you alive. So if there's something more important than physical water, there has to be something more important than, somebody who is politically oppressed. Again, not to dismiss the value of that, but to Jesus' point, there's something above that. What do you guys say?
I just remember our discussion a little bit last week when, we talked about Michel Foucault, who argued that wherever you find oppression, you find evil. And oppression needs to be stomped out in every single way. And people would extrapolate that out to mean that wherever you find poor and people who are disenfranchised, that needs to be stomped out too. That needs to be destroyed as well. I remember talking to one of my former football players, and he was accepting the ideas of the guy who wrote the book on anti-racism. And my point is that if we take our eyes off of what the main thing is, right? If we stop doing the main thing, which is preaching the gospel. When we say we ought to preach the gospel, we do not mean that the old adage, be warm, be filled. we're keeping in mind what the central point is. And every other thing, whether it's feeding the poor, whether it's lifting the problems of the oppressed, whether it is social activism, that comes afterward. Because every person who we feed today is going to die at some point in the future. And if we meet only their physical needs, while we have done some temporal good to them, the eternal and long-lasting good that ought to be done to them, we will have denied and missed the opportunity. But I think the part that you're really getting at is that the CRT folks, they've taken this emphasis of righteousness and holiness that orients the individual toward God, and they've shifted his or her eyes away from God and toward, the things that go on earth here. And that's the only thing that we need to worry about. So in their minds and in their view, whatever that needs to be done, whether it's violence against the oppressors, then it's justified. Because this concept of holiness and righteousness and justice that ought to orient the believer toward God has been removed and supplanted this other thing.
Yeah. Jane?
I was just crossing, well, as you're saying all that, I just like, we think about people's physical needs more than their spiritual needs a lot of times, I guess, because it's what we see right in front of us, like, oh, this person needs food or whatever. And I just thought about, like, if we feed their physical needs, like, and give what their body needs, well, we also have to think about the God that could actually destroy your body too. So it's like, there's something greater than just your physical needs, they need to be saved. And I think a lot of people want to do the moral modification, like, well, maybe if you just thought this way, things will be better. But it's like, the only way to change behaviors is through the transformation that you get through being saved by Jesus. Like, if we're just telling people, do this, do that, we've become just legalists. We're just telling people, be a good person. You need to do this. So I think the only way we could actually do good is to be saved by God first. And then through him, he helps us do the right things.
Yeah. Jesus says, if you're burdened, come to me. If you're heavy laden, just come to me. He says, doesn't God take care of the birds and the sparrows? He makes sure that the flowers are clothed with a splendor greater than Solomon, and that the birds who neither sow nor reap still eat, that he himself provides for you and me, that he himself is our sustenance, that he himself is the lifter of our heads. But what I think happens is this biblical strong emphasis that our desires and our needs and our focus ought to be on God is totally flipped upside down, and that our eyes come down to the really difficult aspect of living, and it's not that we don't care about that. I do care about that. But it's not, for me as a believer, that's not my primary need to solve. I want to help solve some of your issues. I can't solve all of them, but the one that I can help you with is the most important one.
Yeah, a couple verses that came to mind, and by the way, I hope folks get, why this kind of stuff matters. Part of the reason we're having this conversation, I guess I should say, is, I was having a friend who was trying to talk to some business people about this issue, and it's easy for us, that I mean, Leroy and I are in academic circles, so we get time to research, and we both have a bunch of degrees in theology. Jane, I know you've got yours in apologetics. So collectively, each of us has spent a lot of time studying a lot of things, and so trying to, even in that, it's hard to digest, what CRT is and how does it apply. You talk about the average typical Christian who has not studied deeply theology, and quite frankly, churches have done a terrible job teaching theology. So even though they've been faithful maybe their whole life, they just don't have a framework for understanding a lot of this stuff. So when I was trying to come up with, hey, how do we help people? What are some basic verses? And so as you guys were both talking, a couple of verses came to mind. And these, I think they do address directly some of what we're concerned here with, why critical race theory is not compatible with the Christian worldview. Yes, they point out there's some areas where we might agree with them in some of their observations of the world, but their reason, their justification for why those things are wrong, which of course they deny such things as original sin, and their solution to those things are completely off. So we need this
Crazy.
biblical framework. So here's the verses I thought when you guys were talking. Matthew from Mark 8:36, we have this Jesus saying, "What does it profit of us if we gain the whole world but lose our soul?"
Lose our soul.
Yeah.
And you kind of were just saying that, Jane. What does it matter if Okay, understand the context. He's saying, what does it matter if you gain the whole world? That means everything. I mean, what does it matter if you free somebody from oppression, yet they die in their sin? Yes, you've made yourself feel better for a while, and yes, you've even made them feel better. Maybe they have a better quality of life for the next X amount, 20 years of their life. But then they still spend an eternity away from God.
Right.
So, yes, you've done some good, but it's all temporal. It's all fading.
It's all going to burn, my friend used to say.
Yeah. So
my friend used to say it's all going to burn.
Yeah, it's all going to burn. So all the good works we
Like
do.
California?
Yeah, like the sky behind me in California. It's burning! So I think that passage is hugely important for Christians to get this idea that, look, when we talk about the gospel, we're not saying it doesn't have an impact. We're saying that we put the gospel, there's something that comes first. And that's the
impact
second
is
verse.
not the social aspect.
Yes.
The impact is not the social aspect. The impact is the truth of God's word filtering, infiltrating the person's heart, and changing them temporally and eternally.
Yes.
That's the impact. But
Yeah.
they want to take the good deeds and make that the central part of the gospel, and it isn't.
Yeah.
It isn't. The gospel is the good news, not that I've come to put shoes on your feet, put you in a house, put a chicken in every pot. That's not the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think here's the thing is, and I know the feedback, I know the critique of that. Well, it's not changing things fast enough, or it doesn't make any real change. The gospel doesn't really change stuff.
Yeah.
Look at the analogies. Every analogy of Scripture makes it clear that it is a radically transformative, culturally shaping gospel. But you have to get the order right, or it becomes deformed. What does it say? That we are no longer citizens of this world, but we're citizens of God's world, of His kingdom, right? We're ambassadors. We're voyagers. We're just traveling through this world, but our destiny is somewhere else. Our citizenship is somewhere else. So what does that mean? It means that if you are oppressed, if you are suffering, God doesn't just have an idea that, well, I'm going to give you some freedom from the jail, or I'm going to give you a few scraps of food. He said, look, I'm going to give you citizenship in my kingdom, where you have more freedom than you will ever have in any earthly kingdom. And when you begin there, you find new heights of liberty, even in the midst of an imperfect, flawed world that's going to harm you, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
that's intensely transformative.
That is the most mind-blowing, part of all this. I think what we're highlighting is all the internet discussions that we've been having with people are all highlighted in this idea. I was reading scripture yesterday when this expert of the law questions Jesus, and he says, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "What does it say in the law, and how do you read it?" He asks him specifically, "How do you read it?" The expert in the law quotes Deuteronomy 6:5, and I think Leviticus 19:15, where he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says to him, "Well, you read it correctly." Well, why does he ask him, "How do you read it?" Because there were people who read the scriptures differently, and Jesus was giving him an opportunity to answer his own question, and he pointed back to the literal text that these are the most important things that you need to do to inherit eternal life. Love God with everything you are, and then love other people. And I think our friends, our fellow Christians want to they get this backwards. They think that it's almost like they cut off the loving God part for just loving people. And you can't love people unless you love God first, right? I mean, at least in this biblical worldview that I have in my mind, I love people precisely because I love God. I extend myself, not because I'm a nice person, because innately I'm not a very nice person. Ask my wife.
No, you can ask me. It's true. There is no.
I'm just not. I mean,
I love you despite the fact you are just mean.
I tell people all the time, I was in the Marine Corps and I was in combat and I had a machete. And I didn't have a machete for no reason. There were no trees in the desert, you know what I mean, that I was going to use that machete on. I was that kind of person. But when I became a believer, it's almost like I don't remember the person that I used to be. I don't have the same sort of thinking about the world, and I don't have the same sort of thinking about people either. So,
Oh man, okay. This story comes to mind. Actually, we have some more comments online. I'll get to those. Brent, I'm going to get to your passage in a second here, but I got to tell you this story. I don't think I've told this. I don't think I've ever told this on air before anywhere. And I don't think Leroy knows this story. So this is new. So when I was candidating out of seminary to be a youth pastor at a church up in the state of Washington. I come from Oklahoma in the state of Washington. And they're like, hey, man, that's good. We just want you to come meet the kids. And, it's looking good. We want to hire you, but, we want you to meet everybody, see how you mesh with people. So that was great. So they said, hey, we want you to introduce yourself to the kids. They don't know anything about you, but introduce yourself. So I had thought of this for years. And so what I did is I told them this big, long story. And I told them, I said, hey, there's 3 things I'm going to promise you. Everything I'm telling you is true. I can't even remember what the other 2, but the real key was everything I'm telling you is true. And everything happened. This is really my life and all this other kind of stuff. So I really built this up. I said, years ago, I used to be this, party animal. I was, sleeping around. I was having drugs and doing all these other kind of things. And, I just was not listening to the signs. And eventually I got AIDS. And now back then, when I was younger, see, Jane, before AIDS had anything that would be curative, it was a death sentence back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I told them, so anyway, I got this happen, I got AIDS, and I got sicker and sicker, but finally, God came into my life, but then it didn't change, even though I came to know Christ and I turned back to God, and eventually I died. And then they're all like, some of these kids were crying.
Yeah.
I told this. This is a long. My telling of this story was a long time, and I had all these details, and so then some were crying. And then they got mad at me. They're like, "What?" I said, "Wait! I told you everything I tell you is true." And I said, "Everything I told you about getting into fights and the other stuff, all of that is who I am. But the key point I told them was when I was 12 or 13, when I accepted Christ. I said that was the point that changed the man I would become." Had I not accepted Christ, had I denied Christ at that point, I would have become that guy whose life would have ended that way. So I don't have a radical testimony of actually coming out of all those things, but I do have a radical testimony that I never became those things. And the fact that I would have died in my sin in some horrible way is probably true, because there's parts of me that like the idea of fighting and violence and those sorts of things. And I know it's true. You'd never know that. Because I'm such a genteel soul. But, that's what I think we need to look at when we think about social justice or critical race theory, all those things. The power of the gospel is to let us to transform us so we don't become oppressors, so we do love people. If the government has to take my money from me by force to give it to somebody else, then what good have I done? I've taken from one person, which is, through the threat of force, I've taken something from them that they didn't want to relinquish to give it to somebody else. And so I've done something wrong in the name of good. But how much better is it if I say, you know what, I have 2 cloaks, let me give you 1. I have extra of these things, let me give you something of that. Now 2 goods have been done because we're doing things. And that's the goal for Christianity, is not to say don't do good. The goal is to say let it begin in our hearts, and then we change society. I don't know. That's my story.
No, but that's totally in line. Jane, if you got something, go ahead. I don't want to.
Oh, because he'll keep talking, Jane.
It's just kind of like knowing God and letting Him transform you to do the good things. It's kind of like what I said earlier. So kind of just fun with just that.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm just repeating what you said because
It's just like it's so funny. Jesus said, "So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men." Right?
They'll protest loudly in the streets and burn down until they give you things. Give
Mhm.
Exactly. Truly I say to you that they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be done in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So the point is that in all of our social justicing, it isn't to change other people's minds, so to speak. It isn't to show how good we are. It isn't to virtue signal. You know what I mean?
Look how
And
good I am. Yeah.
that's what just generally what we're seeing. What it is a I'm giving out of the kind of person that I became because of what God has done in me. I'm giving to help other people in their situation, whether it, and to kind of relieve the burden that they have in their situation. Not because I believe that my giving is going to solve all of their problems. Absolutely not. Their chief problem is the same one that we all have, which is we all have sin. We all need Jesus. I think that social justice is just a way to kind of give people, do the good, right, without the God.
Mhm.
And the good that it's doing is not all that good. It's just not all that good.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think that social justice is, throwing chairs and interrupting people's night out, it's not social justice. It's wickedness.
Mhm.
It's wickedness.
Yeah. So Brett, he had a verse, or Brent had a verse online here. He said, "What about Acts 3:6?" So for those of you who haven't memorized your book of Acts, or actually Acts 3:2, sorry. He says, "Now a man who was born lame from birth was being carried by the temple gate called Beautiful, when he was put every day to beg from those going into the temple courts." So that's the verse he put specifically. But obviously we know the story that's going on there.
Mhm.
It's this idea that there's a guy who's begging to live, and all of a sudden you have, in this case, disciples coming by, apostles coming by and offering healing. But it's interesting because when I was involved in the circles that dealt with prosperity gospel, actually, it's funny because somebody asked a question, is CRT connected to prosperity gospel stuff? And at the time I said no, and I'm all of a sudden just in this moment saying, well, maybe there is one connection. I think both misunderstand the purpose of what good is. Because in that same story, I remember I wrote a paper for this when I was at because my seminary that I went to was big time into prosperity gospel. So I was fighting this kind of stuff all the time. Even I had mostly good profs, but I was dealing with this. And I wrote a whole paper. I looked at if you look at every instance where Jesus does a physical healing, we can attribute the same as Acts. It's always connected to a spiritual healing, a forgiveness of sin. He said, which is easier to do, forgive your sin or tell this man to get up and walk? Well, of course, to forgive sin. Well, okay, your sins are forgiven here, get up and walk, Well,
Right.
Anyone can say forgive your sin, but you can't do it. So he did the miracles to show that there's a greater reality of healing the needs.
And not only that, but he makes the point of saying your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
And get up and walk.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So he's saying, look, I can do both, but here's the real thing. I have the power to do both. So I think that applies both to the prosperity. So the people in the prosperity gospel missed. It isn't just about being physically healthy. It's being about spiritually alive. That we're dead and now we are alive. We're healed for eternity through the work of Jesus Christ. And so it's the same for CRT. It's like you're saying, okay, let's do good. Let's heal this guy who's crippled. But she's saying, okay, which is really easier to do that or to forgive their sins? If all we're concerned about is social injustice that's not tied to the spiritual injustice that really undergirds all of that social injustice, then we fail to miss the point of the very gospel itself. And I think that kind of answers those questions we're looking at. Doesn't God wants to do good? Isn't CRT just about doing good things? Well, what do you call good? What are we missing?
But this is a big point that I think most people miss about the purpose of signs. The purpose of signs is to cause the people who see the signs to question, from where does this person get their power? The purpose of the signs that Jesus did, like you just explained, were meant to point that Jesus' power to heal came from God. Yes, there is a physical blessing that is imparted to the people who are healed, but the primary purpose of those signs is not the spiritual blessing. It's to cause the people who review them to say, well, where does this guy get this power from? Where does this power come from? Because the whole point is that this is God oriented. And let's look at it from yours and my context. Let's say we go out and do good for someone. We clean their yard. We help them, in the courts or whatever. If the only purpose that people look at us and say, well, this person just did good for me, and they don't point back to this Jesus that, enlightens our minds and inflames our passions in our hearts. If they don't point it back to him, then what good was it? What was the purpose of it? Yeah. And I think that our CRT friends miss that point. They can't help but miss it because that's not the purpose of CRT. It just isn't. The purpose of CRT is to supplant this biblical worldview for a more for a Marxist one.
Yeah. Well, and remember, truth for CRT, we have no way. It's truth is from the perception of the individual. So
Right.
That's why you get the guy who's the professor at USC this last week, who was trying to teach his communication students, who someday will do international business. Hey, then in other languages, people have like filler words. We use the word
Yes.
like. So he says a word in Mandarin that I won't repeat here because whatever.
It sounds like mega with an A.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. So if I'll pronounce, I don't care. No one can fire me. So it's the word is it's. I'll say it slowly though. He says it fast. The accent goes down on the first syllable and then it's a flat tone on the second. So it's niga, and that's the word.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
so he says this 6 times really fast, and it means that in Chinese. So I worked at a Chinese church before, took a little Mandarin back in the day, but so I mean, it's not like you don't hear this word. It means that. So I'm going, hey, look at that over there. That's the word that in Mandarin, ni ga. So he's telling his students, hey, if you're traveling, this is the hers. Well, these students got offended. So this guy is forced to quit this class. He's on leave from the university because he used a legitimate word from another language. I mean, if there is a definition of white privilege, this is it. A bunch of privileged white students at USC who feel like, oh, I'm offended, therefore Chinese language is offensive, because I'm offended. Talk about cultural, whatever.
That is just insane.
But here's the point: it's the same thing because even Brent said, is it like envy? It's a form of greed. I think CRT ultimately, because there's no boundary to that, and you can't impose one as a Christian because you're saying everybody's truth is their truth, which defines what they say is oppression. Oh, I feel that you have oppressed me. I feel that you are being racist. Therefore, you are. So there's no biblical boundary for that, and you can't impose one as a Christian because if you're doing that, you're becoming an oppressor.
Right.
So, in other words, it does become a system of just satisfying people's greed and desire. Well, I feel oppressed because I don't have what you have. Give me that. Well, if I'm a white dude and Leroy's telling me because you're a black dude, so technically you're the oppressed, I'm the oppressor, I have to do whatever you say. I can't say, hey, but Leroy, the scripture said, no, you bring up scripture, and I'm now oppressing you again.
Right. You know what's really interesting about that? So whenever I get into conversations, this is totally bad, so I'm going to be honest.
Well, you're a bad guy. We know
Whenever I get into conversations,
We're all bad. We're all bad.
Yeah.
who are social justicey.
Yeah.
Whenever they try to make a point, I said, now you're pulling out your privilege on me. And and it's like magic. They genuflect. It's kind of cheating, but they genuflect and say, I'm not trying to be privileged. I apologize. See what I just did there? It was totally cheating.
Yeah.
But that's where we are now. We're not two people from different experiences having a conversation and taking each other seriously in dialogue and listening, to each other's words, with the best intentions so that we can get a better understanding of each other. No, we're two opposing forces. We're trying to feed each other, and that destroys dialogue. I think that's one of the reasons why people get so angry all the time whenever they hear pushback on their ideas, because they're not realizing that they're talking to someone who you need to try to learn and listen to, rather than to see him as someone who needs to be defeated. I think it creates this hostility, with other people. That it's inescapable.
Jane, what do you say? Leroy and I have been jumping in here.
I usually have dialoguing with people. Like, people have different definitions of words nowadays. Like, just like when you were talking about the story of that professor, it's like, did they even ask him what he meant, or are they just like, oh, he's saying the N word, like, we need to get this guy fired? I think people don't
Oh, he even
try to.
explained it. If you've watched
Yeah.
the clip, I mean, just go check it
Oh,
out. I
okay.
mean, it's crazy because he
Okay.
says this means the word in Chinese, like in Mandarin, like we would use they might say that, and this is an example of how it would sound in Mandarin. So he was very explicit explaining it, but it didn't
Yeah.
matter. Even the
Yeah.
university is backing the students.
Yeah.
Terrible. I mean, because
Yeah.
it's like, there might be the same word in a different language. There's words in Filipino that are probably like, well, they're cuss words in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you say something and people don't know what you're saying, they're like, did you just cuss at me? I was like, no, I actually just said it like piece of bread or something. So, like words have meaning. And I think people need to realize in other cultures that it might not mean the same thing in your
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think it's just a little ridiculous that you're not even letting the person explain
Yeah.
themselves. Yeah.
Well, and I remember back in college, man, we had all these students in our part of our engineering program. We had the University of Leeds was sort of our sister school, so we had exchanges back and forth between students. And there are these students from Leeds in there, and so they're in class, and we're talking. And one of the students, I don't remember his name, but he leans up. He's talking to one of the girls. He's talking. He said, "So, pardon me, do you have a rubber?" And she turns around and looks at him like she's ready to smack him because she thinks he's asking for a condom. And like in the middle of class, she's like, "What did you say?" He's like, "I made a mistake on my paper. I need to erase this. Do you have a rubber?" And she's like, "Oh, an eraser."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Yeah, oh, so yeah, eraser. We call it rubber. He's sort of like this." And so she doesn't. I mean, so they figured it out. She didn't get all super offended and like.
Yeah.
I mean, if he maybe meant that, maybe it was, but they were able to work it out because they realized, hey, there's differences here. But with CRT, like Leroy was saying, there's no way to work that out. If you're offended, it's too late. It doesn't matter. Oh, let me correct that. In where I come from, this word means something else. Doesn't matter. My perception determines reality. And that's what we get with the idea of even freeing people from oppression. Well, what does that mean to them? What is their definition of wealth redistribution? There is no definition for it. There is no final goal except for what the oppressed group defines it as. So for the Christian to try to say, well, we can take from CRT and borrow that and then layer in the gospel as a constraint. No, because it becomes ad hoc. You're just trying to fix something that's broken with, we can use the Bible to fix it. You can't, because the system denies that there is any such truth that can override this personal impression of those who are from the oppressed group.
Yeah. I saw this.
Yeah, Jane. No, you go, Jane, because Leroy.
I saw this video of this black girl and this white guy, and the white guy was telling her she was oppressed, and she's like, I'm not oppressed. And here, like, people want to say the white people are the oppressors. This guy is literally saying she's oppressed. So I was like, you're the one who's oppressing her right now. And she's like trying to tell him, like, I'm not oppressed. And so it's like, so these people are trying to do all the right things. There's actually oppressing the person who doesn't want to be oppressed anymore. Like this, she was like, I'm not oppressed, and you're actually being racist right now. And so, like, for somebody to tell somebody they're oppressed when that person doesn't think they're oppressed, there's a little bit of a problem there.
Yeah. What's the movie? You guys help me. There's a movie. I can't even think. I'll think about it. Maybe it's like Dumb and Dumber or something like that. It's like they go in to help. And they're like, no, I'm helping you. Let me help you. And they're actually hurting somebody because they misread the situation. And so they're like, stop it. No, I'm helping you. And they're trying to give mouth to mouth and they're not unconscious or something like that. There's movies that kind of stuff happens all the time. Yeah. And that's kind of what you're describing. It's just that movie came to mind, Jane, when you were talking about that. No, let me help you out of oppression. I'm fine. No, you're oppressed. Let me stop.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that I was listening to, this is several years ago, I was listening to this talk by a guy named Hans Ruckmacher, and this talk takes place in 1972, and he's teaching fine arts to these students. And if you can think of the great artists of the past, he's enlightening them to why they were naked babies in some of these, pictures that they drew, and why they depicted women the way they depicted them, why they
Yeah.
depicted men the way they depicted them. And there's one painting in particular that he brings up called The Rape of the Sabine Woman. And it's by a guy named Peter Paul Rubens. And in this discussion, the kids that were listening were so incensed that there literally is a battle going on between this Nobel Prize winning, art teacher and these kids who he's trying to explain what was in the mind of the great artist, but they couldn't get over their understanding of this painting. And then the thing ends after a while, and then they pick it up the next day. And it was so interesting that the teacher comes in and he apologizes to them. But he apologizes not because he showed them the picture, but because he didn't prepare them to understand what they were about to see. So he didn't give them so-called a trigger warning, if you will. And I think of that discussion all the time, because many of these discussions that we have with people, and I've been around, since I was a young person. I mean, I grew up in Southwest Philadelphia, but I've always had like white friends. And it just reminds me that when I was around my white friends, I know, in South Philly, that the conversation, there would be ideas and concepts that I wasn't familiar with. And then when I heard them, I was kind of like, dude, what are you saying? But I realized after a while, I'm dealing with people who don't recognize the gravity of the words that they're saying, right? And it can't be because they're racist, because when I was a kid, white people and black people didn't hang out together, right? But here we are in this mixed group. And I realized from that you cannot get offended by everything everyone says. You have to take time to kind of know people, to see where they're coming from and why they're saying, what reasons they have for saying the things they say. Most of the time, it's just cultural difference. It's not someone trying to be a racist. It's not someone trying to foist some idea on you. They don't understand. I mean, and that happens both ways. That happens with blacks and whites with blacks. I mean, it happens both ways. And if you're so sensitive to everything that everyone says to you, you're never going to get to know anybody. I mean, you're never going to be introduced to the real person. There's going to be a professional side that never says anything controversial, never lets you know what they think. And that's the way that these relationships are going to go in the future. I mean, it can't help but go that way. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to one of my friends, and he was saying how he and a lot of his friends who are all white are struggling with not hating black people. I mean, he literally said that to me, and this is one of the sweetest Christians that I know. But he's looking at all this injustice, and he's like, we're wrestling with how do we not hate black people and not have a relationship with black people because of this, and this guy isn't a racist, but he's saying it's professionally unsafe for me to have a relationship with black people. It's professionally unsafe for me to say anything, that might be considered controversial. And this is what they're creating. They're creating a new segregation because of their own sensitivities. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah. Hey, our time's getting close, and I know, Jane, before we go on, I know I want to give you a chance to mention stuff that's coming up. But let me just throw in a couple other quick verses, just so people can look them up and for their own edification in this conversation. So the other verse that I was looking at is Matthew 6:33. It says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and then all these things shall be added unto you." And that circles back to where we kind of started some of this conversation, right? We're saying how we're pursuing the laws or the things that Jesus is saying. Look, seek first God's kingdom and His righteousness. So righteousness must come first before things like money and freedom and liberty are added in.
Because I like that pronoun modifier, His righteousness, not a contemporary view of it.
Not social righteousness,
right?
But His righteousness.
Yes.
Not social justice, but His justice. Ooh, that'll preach. Oh, yeah. I said not social justice, but His justice. Not I said his righteousness, not so
Yeah.
good. Oh man, that's good. I don't preach, brother. Anyway,
Uh-oh,
the other verse.
you're culturally appropriating.
Hey, I
reading my
used to
mind.
go when I lived in the South. When I lived in the South, man, I used to go to several historically black churches, and man, I miss those. Were fun. I used to, I love the preaching of that. So that's another thing. Well, hey, real quick, I will say this here. I'll give the last verse and we'll close up here. Wayne did ask, how does father absence play? How does father absence play into this misunderstanding? I guess into this whole situation. Well, I just want to acknowledge I got your question, but we're not going to have a chance to go into it because we need to sign off here. But I know we've talked about these issues before, and family is a big issue. Absence of father is a big issue. And we'll probably talk about it again. So keep listening for those things down the road, or just, maybe we can hit you up on Facebook after. And, Leroy's got a lot of time on his hands. He can maybe jump in, or Jane can. She's got nothing else to do. You don't have kids even, Jane. Come on.
Yeah. I really don't have anything to do. Single, don't have kids.
I know. You have nothing but time on your hands. It's just, your life is whatever. Anyway, maybe we'll try to jump on and say that. But last verse, I want 2 Timothy 2:4. It says, "Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and instruction." And I think there's a couple things to say on that verse just real quick. Is that one, to your friend Leroy that's getting frustrated. One is, it's easy to hate the things that when people and get angry in that. But remembering, of course, that Jesus loved us despite the fact that we've hated him wholly and fully. And he died for us. So he laid down his life not for his friends, but for his enemies. And those who we think that the most rabid social justice CRT people that want to tear down, burn down our homes or do whatever, our call is to find a way to still love them as Christ loved us. And so that's not easy. But I said this. I wanted to close with this 2 Timothy passage only because this is to Christians who think, why can't we do social justice? And we should. And I did a little 10-15 minute thing on this week. You have this week. There's a gay guy, actually a whole group of gay people who are Trump supporters leaving a thing, and they're being chased down the street. And this has happened to this group in multiple cities because they have been outspoken Trump supporters. And they are called by these Black Lives Matter people gay slanderous words that, I'm not kidding, 6 months ago they'd get arrested for hate crimes. I mean, the things they're saying and the threats they're making because they're gay are things that they would literally have been 6 months ago been arrested for as a hate crime. But now it's not, apparently it's not chic anymore to protect gay rights, as long as you're advocating for BLM. So this is why I preach the word in season and out of season. It doesn't matter if the gospel is hip or not hip. We preach a redemption and a hope. We preach a freedom that is always in season for God, even if it's politically not. So I would stand up for the rights of the gay guy being abused verbally by those people 6 months ago, and I would stand up for his rights to not be verbally abused today, even though it's out of season. And that's what I think the worry Christians need to remember is that if you hitch your wagon, to this team of horses, you've got to be politically correct to the point where some people it's okay to dehumanize and degrade and diminish, and that is never part of the gospel. So, anyway, we're pushing on a few minutes over here, and that's okay. I'll let each of you guys give a closing word, and I know Jane, you want to mention what's coming up, so I'll let you go last, Jane, so people don't forget what you're going to say. So, all right. So Leroy, go first, and then Jane, you close us off.
Yeah, I would just simply say that my exhortation to any listener is that you make sure that when a person talks about words like reconciliation, unity, equality, justice, righteousness, that you make sure that these definitions are biblical. You ask them to define this in terms of what the scriptures teach, rather than accepting these contemporary notions of those words, because they're going to drag you away from the scripture.
Yeah, I just say fight the good fight, because our Christian worldview is very unpopular, And even with some friends that I have, they're trying to like speak up about the racism that's coming from the other side, because nowadays with CRT, the only person who could be racist is a white person. But now we're allowing other ethnicities to be racist towards other people.
Yeah.
And to even just bring that up, people are like, they're just shocked that you would even say anything like that.
Yeah.
So, I have students who are seeing the hypocrisy, and they're the ones who are being shunned, and like, how could you ever say something like that? And so, like, the real sins of people are being overlooked because they have a different skin color.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say, fight the good fight, and with everything, just bathe it in prayer, because this is a spiritual battle at the end of the day. It's not a political battle. It's a spiritual battle for souls and minds and hearts. And so, just pray before you have conversations with people. And it's always better to do it in a relationship, not on social media, because everybody wants to take what you said out of context. Like, they won't even give you the benefit of the doubt anymore. So, that's my encouragement.
And then you're going to be at a conference, right? You want to mention?
Yeah. So, Women in Apologetics, I have my mug here. So, Women in Apologetics, and Reasons to Believe are having an event this weekend online. So you can watch it from the comfort of your own home. And it's going to be on the topic of science and faith. And I'll be doing a talk on Saturday morning, not my time of day, but on our science and faith at odds. So if you guys want to check that out, go to Women in Apologetics and go to Illuminate Conference.
Okay, and then there's a registration for that. Is it free, or is there a cost? Or
I think it's a really small fee. Yeah,
Okay.
It's nothing too extravagant.
Yeah, I think I've seen it in the past. I wasn't sure what they're doing. I know, like, maybe $30 or $25 or something. It wasn't a lot. In the past, I haven't seen this one. So cool. Well, hopefully people can check that out. Maybe we'll steal a clip of that or something and share that as part of our show, or promote you or something for that. That'd be awesome. We'll figure out how to do that. So, all right, guys. Good time, good talking. Thanks everyone who's listening live. And if there's questions that did come up, we'll try to hop on there and see if we can't connect with anybody. You can always connect with us, of course, morethancake.org/off-the-cuff. And there's a little email box. You can email any of us your questions or ideas, or if you do want to bring one of us out to talk or do a thing, you can connect with us there. It's an easy way to do it. And be safe, be good, and keep serving Jesus, everybody. God bless.
Well.